Hi folks, this video is a recording of a talk I did a couple of weeks ago at the local Polytech College Institute of Technology. It's all about creative entrepreneurship, as you will see. I thought I'd just do a little bit of an intro to give you a bit of context and to let you know, if this is something worth your time watching. I would say it's worth watching if you are somebody who wants to make a living or make some money from your creative endeavors, whether they be, illustration like me, or whether you're a filmmaker or a photographer, or if you're an author even. I was talking to a group of designers here. They're doing a bachelor's course in design, but I kept it pretty broad in terms of the content, so it's not design specific, and if you're any kind of creative, I think you will get something from this. It's basically me going through what I do and how I make money and how you can do the same. So I hope you enjoy and get something from this. Today's talk, as you can see, is about creative entrepreneurship, which is sort of a broad term to cover the stuff that I do and the stuff that a lot of people are doing now and making a living doing what they love and learning to do lots of different things, which we will get into. So I'm Holly and I make a living from being a nerd. I studied English literature and art history at university. I'm a bit of a Harry Potter fan, hence the wand. When I got about 2/3 of the way through my degree, I decided that actually studying other people's art was all very well and good, but I wanted to make my own. So from about that point, I started looking into graphic design and how I might get into that world. And slowly, after I finished my degree, I started working at a bookshop, and I started realizing, oh wait, I really like books, and there are all these books that have covers and people have designed those covers. And it's not one of those things that ever comes up and you do those career quiz things at school and they tell you, well, they told me I should be a tattoo artist, which would be great if I wasn't terrified of needles. But yes, book design is not one of those things that, most of you probably don't know somebody who is a book cover designer. I certainly didn't, and I know some more of them now, but not really in person, because I don't think there are any others in Nelson. There are a few in New Zealand. So it was one of those things where I wasn't aware of it, but I discovered it through that process of, working with books and knowing I wanted to do something creative. In my job, I have to do lots of different things. I'm a book designer, but also an illustrator, hand letterer, digital artist, YouTuber, podcaster, Instagrammer, and shop owner. We'll get into why it's important to be able to wear many hats and learn lots of different skills. So knowing yourself is very, very useful, and especially if you want to go into business and start up a business yourself. These are some personality tests that I quite like. The first being the Myers-Briggs. That's probably one of the most famous ones out there. It's like if you're an INFP or a ENTJ or whatever. That's quite useful because you can take a quiz online and it'll tell you the kind of person you are, basically. And at least for me, that's been really helpful to read through and go, oh yeah, so I'm an introvert. That means I don't want to spend too much time around people, but I also don't want to close myself off so much that I never see anyone and always wear my pajamas. Yeah, I'd recommend having a look at that. Also the 4 Tendencies quiz, which is by a woman called Gretchen Rubin, and this takes you through how you respond to authority and how you, what's the best way of putting it? How you get stuff done. So whether you're the kind of person who's completely self-motivated and will just do all the stuff yourself and doesn't need anyone to tell you what to do, or whether you're the kind of person who needs some kind of outside presence and holding you accountable to the things that you are doing. So whether that's an Instagram audience or whether it's your mum or a teacher, that's really useful to know. And then Hogwarts houses. And I have a point here. We're going to go on to the next one here. I hope most of you are familiar
with Harry Potter and the ideas of the Hogwarts houses, but I will run through them and what each of them means. And I think the personality types or traits from each of the houses actually corresponds to a different part of business. And it's not enough to just have one of them or just two or even three. You really need to have all four of them in order to do at least what I'm doing. And maybe if you went into business with somebody else, you might be able to outsource the Hufflepuff or something to somebody else. But if you're doing it yourself, this is super important. And even if you're doing it with somebody else, I'd recommend cultivating these different things. So first we've got Gryffindor, the house of the brave and the chivalrous and sometimes a little reckless. That's all about putting yourself out there, doing new things and building a following online, which is really helpful. It's been very helpful for me. That's how I sell new products and get myself out there on the internet. Gryffindor is actually the one that I am the least like, so I know that that's the thing I need to work on the most. Then we've got Slytherin, which is ambition, cunning and leadership, and they're not just the bad guys. So to me, this is learning about business, so getting into the nitty-gritty, knowing how to do your taxes and all those kinds of things, and about marketing. Taking initiative and being driven, and also being self-sufficient, especially if you're doing this by yourself. Learning to wear many hats, especially at the beginning. And then Hufflepuff is all about hard work, patience and loyalty. And obviously you have to work really, really hard to build something. And being generous with your audience and giving stuff away for free is a huge part of marketing these days. It's what we call content marketing, and it's creating stuff and sort of learning what works, what doesn't work, and figuring out how to do more of the stuff that does work. And then we've got Ravenclaw, my particular favorite. Intelligence, creativity and learning. So looking at new ways of doing things. Obviously, in order to be a creative entrepreneur, you need to be a creative person and have some kind of creative outlet that is valuable to other people. But it's also worth applying creativity to your business as a whole. So being a lifelong learner and looking out for new things to apply to what you do, and diversifying your income, which didn't really quite fit into any of these categories because it's less of a soft skill and more of a thing that you really need to do. But I put it in there as a nice little segue to the next thing, which is making money. So the way I see it, there are 4 different ways of making money as a creative entrepreneur. The first one, and probably the most obvious, is client work. So this is where you're working with somebody who is external to yourself, gives you a brief, and you're working for them. The next thing is products, where you're making a thing and selling it, whether that's digital products or physical products. Teaching, which is the thing I've done the least of. I'm doing it now, so we're working on that. But I've done a course in the past, so I'll talk about that in a bit. And content is kind of the thing that fits into all 3 of the other ones, but it's what we were talking about before, the content marketing thing, and I felt it needed to be in a separate category, really. So these are the main ways I make money. So the first one is a day job, which is actually a freelance job, but I do it on a regular basis. So that's a regular source of income, which is super helpful. Each week I know I've got a certain amount of money, provided I've done those hours, going into my bank account. And that's just a nice little cushion that takes the pressure off everything else. Then design work, and I work with 3 different types of clients, generally speaking. So publishers, these are people like HarperCollins, or smaller publishers like Our Press, which is a one in Wellington. Indie authors, so people who are self-publishing and see the value in book cover design. And book subscription boxes, which is something that I've recently discovered. And book subscription boxes are a thing where people pay a monthly fee and they get a box with a book in it. It's a mystery book usually, and a variety of merchandise within that box. It's usually along a theme. So it's an example of one of those things where it's really worth keeping an open mind about the kinds of ways that you can make money. Then I have an online shop, which is fairly straightforward. I host it on my own website rather than on somewhere like Etsy. I'll get to that in a bit. Wholesale, so that's selling those same products to local shops. So I sell to places like the Suitor and the Little Beehive Co-op, and that's a different financial way of doing it. Obviously you have to have wholesale prices and you don't make as much money per item, but you can sell more stuff and get it out to more places. Then print-on-demand services, which I put up there, but really I make very, very little from this. This is places like Society6 and Redbubble, which I'll come to a bit later. Hosting a podcast, which is a thing that happened because I have a YouTube channel. Somebody reached out to me and said, oh, do you want to interview some other book cover designers for this podcast and be paid for it? And I said yes. And then I went, oh, I have to talk to people who know more about stuff than I do. So that was a little bit terrifying, but also wonderful because I got to ask all the questions I've been dying to ask book designers under the assumption that, oh, it's for the audience. It's not because I don't know this. And then we've got markets, fairs and conventions, which to be honest has mostly been markets. I did the Christmas market last year and the year before, which is held at Founders, which is fantastic. And if you have products that you're already selling on an online shop or through wholesale, it's an awesome thing to do. You can also do the Nelson market. And conventions is something that I'd like to get into, things like Comic-Cons, because my stuff is kind of nerdy, so it fits into that quite nicely. Teaching workshops, which I will again get into a bit later, and YouTube ad revenue, which is kind of laughable because I haven't made very much on this at all. I've been doing YouTube for 4 or 5 years now, and I think it came out at something like £250 over the course of that entire time. And I think when I broke that down, it ended up being about $1 a video, or a couple of dollars a video. And I've definitely put a lot more money into it than I got out of it, but it has provided other opportunities, such as the podcast. And it's helped me to build an audience. So, client work. How do you get client work? Well, the way I've done it, and the way that a lot of people recommend you do it, is to create your own briefs. So not just doing the stuff that you get given in class and calling that a portfolio, but actually going out there and figuring out what exactly you want to do, or what you think you might want to do, because you might not know that at this point. I certainly didn't at the beginning. I ended up doing bits of branding work and bits of, wedding invites and all sorts of things that didn't fit into book design, and then I narrowed it down. But if you can create a brief that fits perfectly into the kind of work you want to do, then that's the perfect project to show to somebody, so an art director or a company, somebody who could be a client. So a great example of this would be magazine design. So if you wanted to design magazines, and you particularly wanted to design sports magazines, you might create a brief. Well, you'd go and have a look in a magazine shop. Do those exist anymore? A supermarket, somewhere that sells magazines, and have a look at the kinds of magazines that are there. You might measure the size of them, see how many pages they are, the kinds of articles they have, the kinds of layouts they have, and think about how you could bring your own spin on this. So then you would create a brief, say to create a magazine about cycling, and maybe you have some friends who like cycling and want to write some stuff about cycling for you, and basically you do the whole magazine. You create the whole thing, and then you've got this amazing portfolio piece that looks like a piece of client work, and you can still say on your portfolio that this is a self-initiated project, but that shows so much initiative if you've gone that extra mile to create the whole thing. So what I did here is I created book covers, and I didn't just create them and have the digital example, just the JPEG up there. I actually printed them up and put them onto books. And beyond this, I actually created some notebooks, which I then sold on my website. So beyond that, you can sort of engineer projects so that you can also sell them to people, so you can make money from them whether you get client work from them or not, which is quite a neat way of doing it. So this ensures you know what you're getting into and that you actually like doing it, because you might finish this project and have this magazine about cycling and realize that you hate laying out magazines and you never want to do that again. In which case you can go, okay, well, what's something that is similar? What are the things that I liked from doing this? What are the things I didn't like? And create another project based on that information. And then make a website and get on social media. And by social media, I don't mean your personal Facebook page or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. I mean having a separate thing that is your personal brand, and whether you want to put that under, a design company and call it a design studio, or whether you want to have it as your own name. I just go with Holly Dunn Design because it works. And yeah, have your own website. So that's somewhere that is hosted on you. It's your own thing. You've got your own domain, and you can send people there, and nobody can take it away from you. If Instagram goes down, you still have your website, which is very important, because when Instagram went down a few weeks ago, I had a bit of a panic. And I was very glad to see it back again. And to start with the client work, you might have to start with the easy stuff. And I know a lot of people say, don't do work for free. You're devaluing the whole design industry. But there are ways you can do this without being completely devalued. So, at the beginning, if you're fresh out of school, you might not be getting paid what you want to be paid. But if it's a good example for your portfolio, or if you can do work in exchange for something else, which is something I've definitely done. I've done illustration work in exchange for editing work. So if you know somebody who does other things, that's really helpful. But yeah, while you're still learning your craft and learning how to work with clients, I would say take on jobs you want to do. And I wouldn't turn down stuff just because, if it's a perfect opportunity and you think this is exactly what I want to do, but so and so told me not to work for so little or not to devalue myself, you can negotiate terms there as well. So you can say, right, I will do this for this little money, but I want complete creative freedom over this thing. So you do have to be careful about that, but I don't think it's as black and white as people say it is. These are some examples of pieces that I have designed just for my portfolio. So the first up on the left here is a piece, or a set of 3 books. These are some of my favorite childhood books, and I wanted to do some covers with lots of typography. I wanted to really focus on the hand lettering and to improve on that. So that's what I did with that, and yeah, really focus in on that one thing. And then The Raven Boys was a book that I read a bit more recently, and I really liked, and I wanted to experiment with adding a bit more depth to my work and having a bit more ornament on different layers within it. So it was that one. And then this was actually a piece that somebody else drew on Instagram as one of those draw this in your style challenges. I don't know if anyone's come across those, but it's where one person draws a picture and goes, here you go world, draw this in your style, and other illustrators go out and draw it as they would. And it kind of reminded me of the film Crimson Peak, which is one of my favorites. So I turned it into a book cover for Crimson Peak because I'm a book cover designer. And then finally, Name of the Wind, my all-time favorite book. And this was an example of just where I wanted to explore working with more traditional media, because I tend to work digitally now. And this was, using Copic markers and inks. These are more examples that I've created from my own portfolio, but these are all ones that I actually sell now on my site. So I've made money off of those designs as well as having them as examples in my portfolio. So these are notebooks, and that's a bookmark. This is the first client job that I got. I'm hesitant to call it that because it wasn't exactly a brief that was given to me by a publisher. But I created this for my own portfolio. It wasn't called the garden party at this stage. It was just Catherine Mansfield's New Zealand stories, because I love Catherine Mansfield, and there were lots of less than inspiring covers out there. So I thought I'd make my own. This was in about 2015, and I put it out onto the internet on Instagram, and that was that. But a few months later, I was waiting for a bus while I was living in London, and this email came up from an art director at HarperCollins, and I thought, no, that can't possibly be. So I Googled her, and she was legit. And oh my goodness, it was morning in New Zealand, too early in the morning, that I couldn't phone my mum and go, Mum, I've got a job. Somebody at HarperCollins actually wants my work. So I was very, very excited, and just sitting there on a bus, not able to share it with anybody. So yeah, then it got turned into this, and it's an actual book that's out in the world, and I still can't quite believe that that's a thing. So great example of how creating something and putting it out into the world can actually, I mean, it felt like a bit of a fluke, to be honest, but these things do happen. It's kind of awesome. So these are 2 more covers that I've done more recently, and I got these through sending postcards, actual printed things, out to art directors at various publishers. So I did a whole bunch of research on art directors and publishers in New Zealand and Australia, and yeah, sent handwritten postcards. So I had a piece of my work on one side, and then I wrote on the other side in my tiny handwriting so I could fit all the words in, and said, hello, I'm a book cover designer living in New Zealand, and I'd love to work with you, kind of thing. Probably not the best way to word things, but said, I think my work would work well for your fiction, maybe young adult titles, that kind of thing. Both of these are non-fiction, so they clearly didn't listen to that, but that's okay. So then, these are examples of things I've done with book subscription boxes, and how they found me was all through Instagram. So I do these kinds of photographs and put them out on my Instagram, and book subscription boxes, they use Instagram as their primary way of marketing, and there's a big community of bookish people on Instagram as well. So it's sort of all feeds into itself. So I got this job here with a company called Owl Crate, and once that one went out into the world, I got lots of emails from other book subscription boxes, because they're one of the bigger ones. So clearly they saw, oh, this is a designer we haven't worked with before. So it sort of built on itself. I didn't actively go out and look for book subscription box work. It just kind of happened because I was putting work out consistently on Instagram. So then products. So I started out with prints and postcards because they're really cheap to produce and you can put quite a good markup on them. Also, they fit in envelopes, which is, New Zealand is a wonderful place to live, but our postal system, as you will know if you've tried to send anything overseas. I once bought a pair of shoes online and they didn't fit, and I tried to send them back, and it was going to cost as much, if not more, to send them back than the actual shoes cost in the first place. So yeah, things that fit into envelopes, you just have to put 2 or 3 Kiwi stamps on them. It's great. So that's why prints, postcards, bookmarks and stickers were a great idea, all really easy to make. And I get most of those done locally. In fact, no, all of those done locally at the Copy Press, which is in behind WOW and Lighting Direct. I recommend them. And then books. So I produced a picture book, which admittedly I have not made a huge amount of money on. I would not recommend becoming an author as a great way to make a lot of money, unless you're a J.K. Rowling. And then notebooks. So this is a notebook. And what I did is I designed these notebooks so they're perfect bound, like a paperback book. And they have just got just the right number of pages so they fit in an envelope and can be sent overseas. They've also got flaps, which makes them a little bit nicer. And I think that they came out quite well, and they're a good size. People seem to like them. More recently, I've got into enamel pins, such as this one here, because everyone loves dragons. And enamel pins are another thing that were really difficult to sort out at the beginning, because most enamel pins have that rubber backing on them, and that is slightly too thick to fit in an envelope. And you can get those safety backings, and the ones you have to twist. But I had sent some of those out to people, and I'd heard back from somebody that, oh, my pin has arrived broken, and you don't want to be replacing things every second order, and you don't want to be disappointing people. So finally I found a solution to this, which is a kind of backing which is like a safety pin, but it's welded onto the back of the pin, which was at a local company. They're manufactured in China, but I go through a New Zealand company who sort all that out for me, and I found them just by Googling them. Other product ideas, you can go the print on demand route, so Society6 and Redbubble, which is where you can upload a design and people can order that design on t-shirts and pillows and mugs and all sorts of things, and they do all of that for you. They print them, they ship them, they deal with any customer complaints. The only thing with that is that you only make a very little bit of money on each item. So if you can sell a lot of those things, then you're laughing, but you have to keep updating them a lot. And so that's why I don't go in that direction. Also, I like having control over all of my little things. So I don't have that same kind of control over the materials that are used or how things are manufactured. So Amazon, CreateSpace, and Kindle Direct Publishing, if you want to write a book and put it out there, or make a colouring book or an educational book or anything like that, they are ways of doing that and going out to the world for international distribution. Printful is another option. They give you slightly more in royalties than Society6 and Redbubble, and you can integrate them into your own site. So that's something I'm looking into in the future, but at the moment I quite like doing everything myself. And the copy press, as I mentioned before, they are local and they do print on demand. And then you've got digital products, which don't have the same kind of overheads. You don't have to keep any stuff in stock, which is really nice. So obviously ebooks, templates for things like Photoshop or layouts or InDesign, things like that. Design assets, which might be things like Photoshop brushes or Procreate templates. Online courses, a lot more work. You can go onto sites like Skillshare. So if you have a particular skill, say you're really great at photography or a particular type of photography, you could teach a class and just film it like this in front of a camera, and that's something you can get paid for. There are many different ways you can do that and different levels of that, but it's worth looking into if you have a particular skill that other people want. Videos and films and stock photography, if you're into the photography filmmaking side of things, you can sell those on sites like Shutterstock. There are lots of them out there. Wallpapers, you see desktop wallpapers or phone wallpapers. These are quite nice things to just give away for free as well, because they're relatively easy to make and you can recycle other work that you've done. And printables, so that's things like printable greetings cards or printable wedding invites. You'll find things like this on Etsy, but if you can design something that people really like and they can just adjust and print themselves, then that's not costing you anything once you've got it out there. And that can be quite a good way of making a bit of money too. So for teaching, I ran a hand lettering course locally, and that's because hand lettering is a particular skill that I have. And the great thing about teaching is that you don't have to know everything about a thing in order to do it. You just need to know more than somebody else in order to teach them. So I think it's never too early to start teaching stuff. I've done this on YouTube for a little while, so making the odd tutorial. I haven't done a huge amount of this, but making tutorials on how to make certain things, and also talking about your journey. your journey as an illustrator or a filmmaker or whatever. You know, if you can tell a story and say, okay, so I'm here now and this is where I want to be, come along with me and see if I can get there. That's quite compelling, and we all like stories. So that's sort of what I've done a little bit. I probably could lean into that a bit more. I also wrote a book on self-publishing in New Zealand, which surprised me. That's a thing. I'll skip past that. I could talk a lot about that for a while, and started doing talks like this one. So yeah, stuff you can do. You can do it on a blog or a YouTube video, just on Instagram stories. Start with the really easy stuff. You can just, hold it out and talk to the camera. If you don't like it, you can delete it. It's very easy to do. It's a little bit scary to start with, but once you start doing it, it becomes a lot easier. And yeah, never too soon to start teaching. Right. So then content. Content is all the things we've talked about already and more. It's the stuff that you put out into the world without thinking I'm going to get this back exactly. And it's what attracts people to you. So this is the Hufflepuff thing. This is giving generously and putting content out into the world. So I've been doing a YouTube channel for about 5 years. And for a long time, that was just me reviewing books, and people came to get recommendations from me. And from that, I've sort of built an audience as I pivoted into doing more book design stuff and more illustration stuff. And you sort of figure out who the people are who are going to enjoy the stuff you like and you're making. So for me, I am my own target audience, which is great. So if I really like something, I figure that most of my audience are probably going to like it too. Sometimes that's not the case, but for the most part it is. Yeah, so giving people a great reason to follow you and being generous. If you're giving away lots of stuff for free that people like, they'll want to follow you. Okay, so social media, which is so essential to what I do. And I think as a business owner, you really have to think about social media in a different way. You have to think about it as a marketing tool, not as a way to get validation. I've definitely fallen into that trap before. But if you think about it as a place to build community and to test out new ideas, this is what I do with my designs. I'll design something, I'll put it out onto Instagram, and sort of go, okay, well, I reckon this will get about this many likes. And if it gets more than that, that's fantastic. And it gives you an idea of how many things to print if you're doing the if you're doing products and you're only printing as many as you think you need. So I made some pins. I put a post out of the design for the pin. I said, if this gets 400 likes, I will make this. And it got 800, so I made it. And I've sold quite a lot of those pins. So that was a very good way of testing that. So finding the platforms that work best for you. If you're in a visual medium, Instagram is wonderful. But if you're an author, somewhere like Twitter is kind of great. And Twitter, I find, is great for interacting with other people in my niche. So I went out and I found lots of other book cover designers, and I started commenting on the stuff they were posting and getting into little conversations and actually being social on social media, which is really cool. Just don't be spammy. Don't go straight in and ask somebody, can you look at my portfolio? Or can you hire me? Because people don't like that. And you probably wouldn't go up to somebody in person and do that. So same etiquette applies. Some final practical advice. So keeping your overhead costs as low as possible for as long as possible makes a big difference. So if you want to go on this journey of creative entrepreneurship, it's not easy and it's a lot of hard work, but you'll get there quicker if you're spending less money. So it might be a case of moving back in with your parents for a year, or living with more flatmates than you're comfortable with and making a few sacrifices in the short term for the longer term where you can actually have a profitable business. Figuring out some work-life balance and building healthy habits. So this is something I've learned the hard way. Recently I've had some issues with my hands, kind of going a bit tingly and sore and weird, and pain in my neck, and it turns out that's from working too much. And I thought I was doing enough exercise. I've got a dog. I was out walking with my dog about an hour a day, but no, apparently not. So having enough breaks during your day, particularly if you're working at a computer, all of that. I know you probably won't listen to me telling you this, but oh, please do. It makes all the difference. I've just taken up yoga and it's changing my life. Learning doesn't stop after you leave school. This is another thing that everybody tells you, but it's so true. And yeah, being adaptable and being able to learn new stuff is so important to being a creative entrepreneur. And being able to figure out, okay, I love doing this thing, but this thing in my business is not making me money, so I need to put it on the back burner for now, and I can come back to it. And then, yeah, learning to do all the things before you outsource it. So as tempting as it might be to just say, accountant, do all my taxes, it's quite good to know how to do that stuff yourself, because if your accountant gets sick, then you're going to have to do it and you're not going to know. And also your accountant might be ripping you off. I mean, that's a big example, but I've learned to do all sorts of other things like photography and a bit of filmmaking, just things that I never thought I'd be doing. Public speaking, myself in year 10, thinking that public speaking would be part of my job, would be completely terrified right now. But yeah, lots of different things. And it's very helpful to be able to do that stuff yourself. And then you have complete creative control, which I really like having. Okay, finally, some resources. Podcasts. I love podcasts because I can listen to them while I'm out walking or while I'm out drawing stuff. So Creative Pep Talk. This podcast has changed my life. It's a guy called Andy J. Pizza. Easy to remember. He's not actually called Pizza, but that's the name he goes by. He's an illustrator. He does a podcast with very practical advice on making it as a creative in any field. So even if you're not an illustrator, there's so much you can get from this. His advice is so practical and helpful, especially if you're wanting to create what he calls creative side quests, which is, personal projects that then turn into work, basically. So lots of great strategy on that. 3-point perspective is 3 guys talking about illustration. So if you're an illustrator, that's very useful. Don't Keep Your Day Job is a woman called Catherine Heller, and she interviews lots of different creatives in all different fields. She's a musician herself, and it's sort of how people have turned their dreams into their jobs, basically. The Honest Entrepreneur is a new one, which has just been started up by a guy called Tom Ross, and he is a designer. He owns a company called Design Cuts, which is a bit like Creative Market or Shutterstock. They have lots of stock graphics. And Design Life is a couple of Kiwi women who are living abroad, and they talk about design and work-life balance, things like building websites, lots of different things. So if you want a nice Kiwi accent in your ears, then they are good people to listen to. On YouTube, The Future is awesome. They do like podcast style interviews, but in video form. They do tutorials. They do portfolio reviews. Very, very cool. They know a huge amount of stuff. It's a design studio based in the States. Roberto Blake is a graphic designer turned marketing guy. He is YouTube is his main thing. So if you're interested in starting a YouTube channel or a podcast or learning more about Instagram, he's a great person to look up. Will Terry is one of the guys from the 3-Point Perspective podcast in the previous slide, and he has a YouTube channel about illustration, particularly children's book illustration, but there's lots of stuff in there that is kind of cross industry. So that's worth looking at. Dina Rodriguez runs a podcast called Women of Illustration. She's on YouTube as well, and I think it's on podcast apps now. But the first season of this is her interviewing lots of people who have only been doing illustration as a job for a couple of years. And I've found that really useful, being quite early on in my career as well, knowing that, you know, sometimes when you listen to somebody who is the top of their field, they're not very relatable because they're so far ahead of you. So listening to somebody who is only a few steps ahead of you can be really helpful. And yeah, Dina is awesome as well. And then Catnip, she describes herself as the human marshmallow, and she's just really squishy and cute and adorable. And her art style is so different to my own. It's not even the kind of thing that I'm necessarily attracted to, but she's so bubbly and lovely. She does these studio vlogs where she shows you what she does in her day-to-day life, and I just get the warm fuzzies whenever I watch her stuff. And good business advice. And finally, Skillshare. If there's anything that is not covered in your course, Skillshare is a good place to go and learn about photography or copywriting or basically anything, accounting. It's kind of amazing. SVS Learn is a more specific version of Skillshare in some ways. It's all about illustration, but they've also got a bunch of videos where they talk about things like contracts, which are really important to know about, and building an Instagram following, all of that. That's a subscription-based thing. I think it's $30 or $40 a month, but I'd recommend signing up for a month, getting through those videos in that time, and then continuing if you feel it's worth it. Squarespace is what I host my website on. Just thought, yeah. I find it's really good. There are lots of other ones out there, but it's good for hosting a shop and everything. And Co is a recent discovery of mine. It's where I'm doing all my accounting now. It's a little bit cheaper than going for something like Xero, and it's set up well for individual creatives. So you can track your time on there, which is something that I should have been doing earlier in my career. But yeah, time tracking when you're working with clients is very, very useful. And you can do all your expenses and everything and have an overview of your finances on there. Nelson Tasman Business Trust, which are obviously a local organization. If you're setting up a business or you're going it alone as a freelancer, go and talk to Sarah there. She will set you up with all the stuff you need to start a business in New Zealand. Things you need to know, like how much tax to put aside, all of that. And they have lots of great resources as well. I've put an extra S in business, haven't I? Business. Excellent. Oh, there was bound to be at least one typo in there. Yeah, so good luck. And if you want to find me on the internet, that's where I am.